Jobs sometimes is a difficult task. We have a great global group joining us today, participating in this webinar, so we look forward to interacting with you all today. I am Natalie Jenkins, and I'm working on getting the slides to move here. And I'll be the moderator for today's call. I'm Director of Organizational Development for New and Improved. And as you know, being an employee of New and Improved, sometimes we get off the beaten path and explore things a little bit more broadly than you might normally expect. And we are going to really look at this topic today and explore it a little bit more broadly and try to really bring you some new value. We will be, as you heard, recording this broadcast so that we'll be able to share it with you and others after today. Joining us, we're really going to be picking the brains of Bob Eckert, who prides himself on literally being able to think creatively inside a box. So Bob, say hello.
Good. I'm saying hello to everyone, and our intention today really is to think about serving you from the point of view of how do you keep innovation alive during change. Really, how do you do it? We'll talk about change and the dynamics of it, but if we've done a job well today, for all of us, we've thought together about how to make that happen.
Thanks, Bob. And then also joining us is Newell Eaton, who finds that it's just always a good idea to wear a helmet because you never know what you might be running into during your day. So Newell, go ahead and say hello and give some comments.
Yes, hi folks. As you can see, I like to look forward, but I also keep a rear view mirror, so I need to look back as well as forward.
That's the square thing. I didn't see that. Yeah, there you go. Good, good, good.
And I'm kind of excited to have this conversation with everybody today. You know, just how do we keep innovation alive in a sea of nonstop change that we're in, you know, particularly around those things that are big that we have no control of. So I think exploring that's going to be really kind of fun to do with you guys.
Good, and they have a diverse background that we're really going to be able to lean in on today with a broad experience in government and criminal justice systems, retail, manufacturing, where they've led change efforts. So they have some really in-the-field experience. And then helping us on the kind of backside of today's webinar is Denise Morgan, who, again, likes to explore different adventures in the world. Denise, why don't you tell us a little bit about how we'll be interacting with the GoToWebinar platform today?
Sure. If you have a question, or if you'd like to, we're hoping you respond to prompts that we give you. So, for example, you know, an interesting way to tell us you're here, and we ask everyone to send in a comment. As to do that, you're going to go to the question section of your dashboard and enter in a question to the staff. That'll come to us, and we'll be able to respond. So you won't be able to speak, but this is the easiest way to send us a message. And in fact, a couple people have already sent a note. One person asked if we'll send a certification of completion to the attendees, and we'd be happy to do that. We'll be also sending you an email including a link to the recording of this webinar so you can enjoy it again, and plus other fun stuff that we think will help you understand what we've talked about and have a little fun.
Great. And Denise will be monitoring some of the questions as they come in along the way. This is intended to be an interactive webinar, and we're going to get started with that real soon here. But please, at any time you have a question, go ahead and pose it. Even if we can't get to it right away, you know, when we pause for questions, we'll have those ready. So as questions occur to you, go ahead and send those, and we'll be monitoring those along the way. Thanks, Denise.
You're welcome.
So, Newell, this is a beautiful dressed-up pig we've got here on the screen. So tell me, what does it mean, let's get real?
Well, first of all, for any of you pig lovers out there, I know it's important for us to acknowledge the importance of pigs for anybody who's going to feel
no offense intended.
No offense intended, or maybe there is, I don't know. But the important thing about when we start dealing with change is how do we really observe it and get real with it? So often we stick our head down and can get into denial or many things like that. So how do we really notice what is true based on what we actually know? How do we do that? How do we? And it's not just being that way with ourselves and observing ourselves, but it's what is it we are noticing with others? Let's get real.
Yeah, and the other with this, Nat, is that we know change is difficult, and so we're not going to be, running this kind of, fantasy consultant talking thing that says, well, you just do this and it'll be easy. Change can be difficult, and that's a reality, so let's not pretend otherwise. Within that, though, I bet there's some things we can do to make it work better for innovation.
That is good. So we're setting the expectation here that we're going to have a frank discussion around this topic. We're not going to sugarcoat it for you, but we're going to try to help make you feel like you can help bring value to whatever your situation currently is. And so let's now shift to think about what are your headlines right now? What changes are occurring for you? So this is the interaction part. So that question tab that Denise pointed out to you, we want you to use that right now and let us know what types of changes are occurring for you, your team, the organization that you're in, the way that you're doing work. And this can be things that are happening within the organization that are either above you or below you. What's going on right now? What types of changes are you experiencing, or are you just coming off of in your organization? And then Denise, as you start getting some of those, why don't you go ahead and verbalize those for us and let us know what's coming in.
Sure. 510K FDA submissions. So,
right. So going through all that craziness, the difficulty of doing so.
Doing less with more, following a reduction in force. How can we move on with our innovation efforts? My boss is going on maternity leave soon. How can I handle the change?
Somebody's planning for succession, and so thinking about change after they retire.
New organizational structure in my department, growing our team, new products and adapting to market requirements. We're merging with another company, so the whole management structure is changing. My organization is embracing national streamlined changes for our whole organization, dealing with softening of business, which is impacting our strategy, people reverting to more short-term tactical behavior.
Yep.
Well, Newell, any comments on some of the changes that we've heard occurring?
Well, they're pretty significant. You can see how they're going to have major impacts on people's lives in terms of it. And yeah, there are things that some of which you partially control and some of which you partially don't. It's like some of these, are they happening to you, or are they things that you are doing? I'm thinking like one here reminds me of a guy I'm working with, a leader right now, who we spent 1.5 years trying to help him position his organization for sale in a merger, which he really wanted. And now he got the merger. And part of the merger deal is now he's not only needing to lead his organization, he's got to lead 3 others. And besides those 3 others are in 3 other parts of the country. So here's something that was a change you would say you wanted, but at the same time, look at all those unintended things that started to happen, which he really hadn't taken into consideration.
Yes, and Bob, any additional comments from you about the types of changes that we're hearing from the participants today?
Well, without an exception, I would say that everything we've seen come in is disruptive. It changes the flow. It changes the way things are going. Our premise is that even in the midst of that disruption, if you have the right intention, there's a likelihood that you can take actions that are more likely to either shorten the period of unproductive disruption or allow innovation to breathe during that disruption. And that's going to be where we want to play today.
I would say even flourish. Yeah.
Flourish, good, yeah.
Well, and I imagine if our organizations really did have a news channel, it would be breaking in constantly saying, this just in, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
It's just change is happening so frequently. So what happens to productivity during change? We have this statistic that the U.S. Department of Labor kind of rule of thumb is that employees normally are productive 6.5 hours per day. So now we're going to ask you, we're going to bring up a poll. Denise is going to launch for us in just a minute, and we're going to ask you what your best guess is on what happens to productivity during kind of some of these intense changes that we've been talking about. So Denise, why don't you go ahead and launch that poll?
Okay.
And once you see it appear on your screen, you can vote and submit your guess.
So how many hours a day are we productive when there's intensive change going on? When there's a reduction of force, when there is a merger, when there's an acquisition, when I have to expand my team?
Okay. Right now, the majority of people are guessing it's less than 4 hours. About a third of people are saying 5 hours. Give you a couple more chances to send your answers in.
Okay, go ahead and get your vote in.
All right.
Looks like we've got about 80% voted.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll give it a few more seconds. I'm going to close the poll. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close.
When I saw the
And
actual,
here's our responses.
very surprising. Yeah.
Yeah. So most of you think it's 56% think it's less than 4 hours. 34% of you think it's 5 hours, and then another 10% of you think it's basically about the same or a little more. Well, what's the actual answer? Do we have that there?
Can we go ahead and hide this?
Well, the actual answer is that it gets down to 3.6 hours per day. And so
wow.
It seems like 56% of you, had that feeling that it was a drastic drop to 3.6. And, nobody, well, a few people did think it increased. And, I think that comes into play that sometimes you have to put in more hours initially. So I can see how in some cases that might actually occur. And Denise, can you tell me, are you now seeing my screen again? Have you closed the poll?
I have closed it. I am seeing your screen.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. So not surprising, there's some impact on productivity that happens during change.
Can you imagine what happens to innovation when that happens? People duck their heads, they shut down, is anybody going to offer new ideas? That's
right. Or a lot of the innovation is, how do you look busy during that time? If those numbers are real, it's almost hard to believe. But how then, we're still at work, and we still look like we're doing things. So maybe the creativity is being applied to that, the appearance of busy, the appearance of productivity, when in fact our mind is just befuddled with the change at times.
Right.
Right, and there's a lot of
confusion
talk around the water cooler, right? A lot of talk of, either the Ain't It Awful Club or, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? What are you doing? Everybody's, just, talking to each other a lot just about maybe how they're feeling during this change.
Kind of what the neuroscience research shows at a time like that, it's not that we're lazy. It's when we're in that state of confusion, we're shut down in a way that exhausts us. Our feelings are numbed. We're just not in a place. We're sort of like in a state of shock.
Motivation goes down, all kinds of things. Yep.
So now we want some more interaction for you. So we're going to have you go back to the questions area of your dashboard. And in one word, how do you, or if you would like, how do you perceive your team feels about the change that's going on that you told us about initially? What's a feeling word?
Okay. Concerned, uncertain, frustrated, confused, frustrated, excited, anxious, apprehensive, confused, energized, anxious, nervous, unsure, aimless, unsure, confused. So a lot of common themes there.
A lot of confused. Bob, what's
Well,
your perception of those comments?
You see a polarity there, right? So there's a sense in some cases of aimless, tension, unsure, and on the other side of that polarity, there's some excitement, some energy. Oftentimes, my experience in working with companies that are undergoing change is that the degree of belief in my ability to impact this new future that's going on determines my level of engagement. So if it's a thing that I perceive as happening to me, and most of my mental story is about this thing that is happening to me that I've just got to wait and see how it's all going to shake out, well then I feel aimless for a while. But if I say, okay, this thing's happening, I'm accepting that it's happening, and I've got some impact on this new future, well, I can get started right away, and so now I have a degree of excitement. So oftentimes, as a leader, I want to make sure that as we're going through some type of change, I'm helping people move in the mental stories that they have as rapidly as possible to they have a place of possibility in this new reality, so that now we can begin to do something about it and move forward. And then you'll generally see it's stressful, and you still see a loss of productivity for a period of time as people figure out how to work and find out, are you believable in what you're telling us, that I'm going to be able to have a place and make a difference in this new future? But it takes that time. And so that's why we see that polarity of fusion, of feelings, rather.
And Newell, any comment?
Yeah, in a way, this is not a surprise that we have mostly negative words here in the list, in that when we approach anything new, it really gets back to, we sometimes talk about the gator brain, but also the sort of the limbic brain. We're kind of wired to start with anything new from a state of concern. And it even shows up so strongly that the psychologist did this study on emotion words that are available in English. He came up with 558, and out of those, well over 60% were negative words. So the vast majority of our language is that way.
And, so help us unpack this a little bit, Newell. We talked about the change that occurred, and then we just talked about feelings. So help us understand the difference between change and transition.
Yeah, I think this is really a very helpful concept here that William Bridges first brought to my attention. And it's really this notion that there's a distinction between what's actually happening, the visible, what we call the change, the event and the situation. That's external to us. Well, that's not the whole story. What's going on in the invisible part is the transition. That's really the kind of where each of us deal with this differently, but that's how we're experiencing the change. And that varies dramatically from person to person, really based on their personal history with change, how they grew up. If their main experiences in life had been when change is happening, it was something they did not control and something that was happening to them, they're going to approach change generally from a more concerned, fearful base. Whereas if they really ran the show, in other words, if you look at your history personally and say, most of the major changes in my life, did I really initiate those? If that's true for you, you probably look at and embrace change naturally. But if it didn't, you probably don't. And while we have that distinction, each of us experience change. While we experience it differently, we all go through basically the same 3 phases of transitions with this.
And help us, know how we move through that. So, kind of going from where we are today to where the change is leading us to.
I'd like to do this by sharing with you an experience I had with someone I have been coaching for a couple of years. Let's say his name is Tom, to kind of protect his actual name. His father retired and in the process turned the family business over to him. it had two locations, one in upper part of New Hampshire and then another one in middle of Massachusetts in Worcester. And at the time, he was based in Worcester. He wanted to move the main headquarters from where his father had been up in New Hampshire down to the place he was based in Worcester. So he was all kinds of excited. You know, he was feeling that was great. But when I asked him to stand back and take a look at the situation and observe it, he realized that there were a lot of endings. There was a lot of loss. You know, it was this shift in the culture was going to mean all kinds of things, not just for him, but his CFO, who lived up in this beautiful house up in the middle of New Hampshire. Was there any way he was going to get her to even move to Worcester? What was he going to do in terms of moving these people? So from this time of really the letting go and getting closure, he started becoming more attuned to the impact that was going to have, which kind of was instead of this thing he was looking forward to, all of a sudden it was like more of a panic, which put him into what we call here the neutral zone. You know, what was the upside and downside of it? You know, really it's more chaos. How was he going to sort this out? What kind of conversations was he going to need to have with all his people to make this begin to move, and how were they going to feel about it? While it offered an opportunity for creativity, though, too, because it wasn't going to be the way it used to be, really what was the new part going to be about? And so then we got into the phase of actually the move had occurred. Some people chose not to move. They stayed in New Hampshire. He had to hire new people. So he brought that in the neutral zone. So by now they're at the place where the organization, about a year and a half later, has resettled in this new headquarters. People are reconnected. There's a sense of renewal. And now he's moving forward with the business. But in that whole time period, there was a huge loss in productivity and a lot of turmoil in terms of it for a lot of individuals, based on what different people cared about. Lots of different rates of acceptance, yeah.
And Bob, as we think about these phases, which you can understand, does it occur at the same time for everyone? Is there a certain time frame for ending, neutral zone, and beginning?
That's the fascinating thing, and some of it has to do, quite frankly, with the maturity of the individuals as they're going through the change. And so there are things we can do to foster that maturity. There are ways from a creativity leadership point of view that we can foster the kind of inner dialogue and questioning that helps people move along. Fascinating thing happened this week that I've observed. The local forestry and hospitality school, Paul Smith College, may be changing its name to include the name of a new benefactor. And many alumni were pretty upset about that, and there was a sense of loss of the original name. And when you look at the dynamics, it's pretty likely that this name will go through. So there was this ending thing, and everybody was of a mind, and everybody talked on a Facebook page that they created about how this wasn't so good, and they wanted to fight it, and they are. It's not a done deal yet. But it's beginning to appear as if it will be a done deal to most folks who have seen the court proceedings and this kind of thing. And so just last night, there was this kind of place in the Facebook group where there's this neutral zone combined with a tremendous amount of chaos, and it devolved, fascinatingly, it devolved into a lot of angry name calling, and then the group split. And a new Facebook page was created for those that want to move forward with helping the college no matter what its new name is going to be, and those who will disengage from the college if they make this name change. So the beginning,
interesting.
So of course the folks that disengage, that's the end of it for them, right? But the beginning is already some really fascinating activities have been undertaken, not just thinking, but action, to help grow the footprint and the reputation of the college as it goes forward. Boom. And it just happened. Really, the whole thing has played out, in my view, on Facebook over these last couple of months in an incredible way. And it just yesterday. Now, the faculty, a different group of people, not the alumni, the faculty got to the new beginning within a few days because they had a better sense of the understanding of the need for this financial infusion. So the individuals will vary in terms of how long it takes to get there.
Interesting. So it's messy, and it's what's helpful about understanding these phases is that knowing and kind of recognizing the signals, it'll help you to see if you're maybe in the new beginning and you see some chaos and different things happening elsewhere. then you can say, you know what, I've kind of made the transition, but maybe my team hasn't yet, or somebody else might be still in the ending stage. So kind of recognizing those and understanding what phase of transition people are in or groups of people are in could be really helpful in helping you to lead during some of this messy chaos that happens during this change.
Natalie, one of the things is even on a team, it can be very different for different people.
Right.
What are the different motivations of different people? Some people, if it's affiliation, for example, they care about, and it's going to break up their group, even if there's more money, even if there's more status, they want to be back with their people. So really, the different motivators really have to be looked at to understand how, if you're going to help a team through. It's very individual in that sense.
Yeah, thanks, Newell. That really sets us up for this next poll to get some ideas from the group of which of the losses do they believe will impact their team's ability to be productive and innovate during the change. And so there's 5 options, and so we would, are we having them pick 2, Denise, of which ones they think would, just one? Okay, sorry about that. So go ahead and launch the poll.
And someone's asking about who's speaking because they got here a little late. That's Natalie that's talking. Denise, you heard her voice for a second there launching the poll. This is Bob, and the other voice is Newell.
Yeah, that's me.
Our votes are coming in.
To vote quick, vote often. And of course, this is going to be situational, right? Because in your mind, as you're taking this poll, you'll be thinking about some change, whether it's, a reduction in force, or it's a merger with a new business, or it's a significant growth, or as one person said, a softening of business. And so what kinds of things, where is the impact for you? It's not that there's a right answer to this, you'll see.
Exactly.
Of course, we want you to be thinking about the impact this is going to have on the people around you, and that's the thing you'll need to be working with to play around with the variables you can pull or twist or energize in order to foster a more rapid return to an innovation team.
Okay, we're almost there.
Why don't you go ahead and, close the poll and publish?
Okay.
Denise, go ahead and read those off for us.
Sure. We've got half the people feeling it will be role clarity. Next is meaningful work at 20% and confidence at 20%. And then friendship is 3% and power and influence is 8%.
So Bob, what are your thoughts about these results?
It really shows up to me the role clarity dynamic when I think about the various organizations that I've been a part of, both personally and those that I've worked with as a consultant. The moment that there's a significant change, we've got the paper way that we're supposed to get work done, who we report to, who's on our team, blah, blah. That's all on paper. But the reality is that you get work done through relationships that get changed a little bit, who you have access to, who you don't have access to, the specific responsibilities of different people. All that needs to get relearned. And during that time, it becomes difficult to know. I used to be able to just go get George and say something to George, and it could get done because I knew George was the right guy to talk to. But now in the new reality, a merger, an acquisition, a change in role, somebody getting laid off that was keyed into, how do I do that? That becomes really difficult. So I'm not surprised to see that's double all the, the next two in terms of it. So, and so then that begets the question, how might I, if that's what's going to disrupt my team, what might be the things in this new matrix or this new organization that help us to start to do that more rapidly? Help us to get people to the place where they understand what they're who to go to, who are they going to, and that's not a paper thing. That's about talking with people. That's about interacting with people. So how do I get people out there shaking hands, chit-chatting, having lunch, having a coffee, talking in a team, solving a problem together so they can figure out who's really going to step up here and who's the person that tends to hold back because I know I can go to the person that's going to step up. Having those kinds of problem-solving sessions very rapidly may not be the real work output, but it's the problem-solving session about how we're going to get to be highly productive as rapidly as we possibly can. And in that problem-solving session, I get to learn about the way that new people that I'm interacting with behave. So that lets me know who do I go to get the work done with.
Yeah, it's a tricky dynamic because sometimes your role has changed so much you really don't know what you're supposed to be doing versus what somebody else is supposed to be doing, and there's this, you know, do I step on their toes? Am I stepping on their toes dynamic? Newell, any comments that you have about what's showing up as far as what losses might impact productivity and innovation?
As I'm listening, what really strikes me is power and influence and role clarity are really one and the same. Meaning, if what power is about is being able to impact the world in ways that matter to me, how I act, that really that is about what my role is. It's how do I know what power I have to do? What are sort of the ways in which I interact? What are the conversations that I need to have to get my work done? You know, that'll get the results I'm looking for. That really is about one's power. And but it shows up. Our language feels more comfortable with saying it in terms of role clarity. But it just struck me those really are one and the same. It's about how am I going to have power in the world? How am I going to have an impact on what matters to me?
Nice.
What do I care about and what do others care about? So.
Interesting. Denise, go ahead and close that poll. Thank you. And so with all of this showing up and you know, innovation, maybe people keeping their heads down because they're unclear as to what happens, I would guess that maybe, Bob, this is when some resistance shows up. So can you tell us a little bit about why maybe that happens?
Well, here's the fascinating thing is that most of the big changes that come into an organization, we don't necessarily have an impact on the fact that that change occurred. If the market softens, it's too late for us to impact the fact that the market softened. If we're merging, usually we're not the people, most of us are not the people making the decisions about that merger. So the reality is that the change is oftentimes handed to us by external factors. We may resist that for a while. We may moan and groan about it. The problem is not that the change is there, but that our speed of transition into the new change. So, and it's this transitioning is where our resistance shows up. And while we're resisting, our productivity decreases. So how might I then, as a leader, figure ways to help people transition more effectively and more rapidly? And it's this polarity between holding on to what was, you know, it's good back in the good old days, whatever those good old days might be, and not, you know, letting go from, you see this thing, some people hold on too long and some people just like disengage. That's what we mean by let go. They just disengage. Well, screw it, I'll just do whatever I'm going to do until, you know, something changes. And so we get into this unproductive place. And there is a way out. There are some tricks to get out. So now we framed the problem a little bit. Now let's talk about how we get out of this. What are some of the strategies that we could use as leaders or individually for ourselves to help us get out of this unstuck or get unstuck or get out of this stuck place as rapidly as possible? Newell, grab this.
So
yeah, Newell, go ahead.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
So the first thing that comes to mind when I think about this is to recognize that sometimes the change hasn't even happened yet, that it really is something that might happen in the future, will happen in the future, but we're already acting as if it has. And, you know, it brings me to one of my favorite old quotes about Mark Twain saying that some of the worst things in my life never even happened. So it's how do we actually notice what is versus what might be? It begins with that. So a couple of things to look at it are from let me give you one example. Let's start with redefine. When you're in this tug of war between letting go and holding on, one of the things you can do is look at it from a different perspective. An example of this that it comes to mind for me is I was working with a guy, let's call him Adam, who was CEO of a small employment company recently. And all of a sudden, Sam, his lead for sales, told him he was leaving within the next 6 weeks. His father of Sam had given him a bunch of money to go travel the world with his girlfriend for a year to find himself. Lovely. So here's this guy. It's a small company. All of a sudden, talk about calling me up in a state of anger. This guy, CEO, is just distraught. He didn't know where to turn. So after I listened to him for a while, and I said, now, Adam, why don't you stand back and look at this? What might be the opportunity here? How can we look at this as a possibility? And he said, I really wanted to change our sales model. I really wanted to offer a new product online, and my old sales guy never bought it or never could do it. And so I could actually reduce my overhead, look for an outside supplier to help me with this, and I could move in a whole new direction. So he really was able to redefine it as an opportunity.
You hear the tool in there, gang? So those that have been in our training, so there's praise first, right? There's point, that tool, and we'll make sure that if you don't know that tool, when we send out a communication letting you know where stuff is, there's a spot on the website where you can read a white paper around that tool. So good creativity tool, once again, shifting us out of that middle. Tell us another one, Newell.
Finding the bright spot. So let's go to replace. Now, here's a situation that I recall when I had a job I loved a long time ago. I still love the job I have, but I love that job then. And got a new boss. The new boss said, hey, I want you to stop all of what you've been doing. I've been out doing customer relations in the community. I love to travel and all the rest of it. He said, I want you to stop all that stuff. We don't need that now. I need you to work inside. Well, I went home to my wife that day when I heard that, and I said, it's time for me to get my resume out and start thinking about what next to do with my life. But after a long bike ride of reflection, I said, how do I make use of this as a new opportunity? How could I really replace what I did before with something new? And it occurred to me I've been wanting to go back to school and study some things for a while. I wanted to learn how to really use computers more effectively. And then how could I really embrace the idea of what he was asking me to do and focus on how that was going to be good for the well-being of the overall system that we mutually cared about. And so I basically engaged in a replacement strategy.
And there's the trigger of the tool, scamper, substitute, combine, amplify, modify, put to other uses, etc. That way of thinking is what made that shift. So again, I'm thinking from the point of view of an organizational development person or a leader, or even for myself, but especially influencing others. I'm thinking, what can I do ahead of time that prepares the people that I work with such that they're more likely to greet the change with an attitude like Newell very rapidly got to on that one. You'll notice in both stories there had to be a bit of Ain't It Awful Club conversation, first with his wife in this most recent story and previously as he listened to the CEO. But how might I get folks to the place where they're mentally making this shift so that they transition? Notice the change is static, they didn't have control, but how do I get them to transition? Let's do that last one, Newell.
With reinvention, I mean, here is a real good example of when you have a breakdown that results in a breakthrough. And this is something I read about at the University of Virginia's Health Resources. They really had come into a situation where they lost some doctors in their cardiac prevention area, and they were getting lots of complaints about just not enough time with docs and so forth. So they created this thing they called Club Red, with see if it was a pilot to see if it would work, where what they would do is they would see patients in groups, something that really unusual in the medical profession. They'd meet with 12 patients all at the same time to share and work with them in a group rather than on a one-on-one for an hour and a half instead of the typical 15 minutes, the hour and a half for the group of 12. People loved it. It saved them money, and it really became a whole new way of engaging in cardiac prevention practice. Totally reinventing how they were working.
So for me, when I hear that story, I think about a culture that was prepared to be open to radical new ideas as they floated by. So, of course, the seeds for that are planted well ahead of the change coming along, so that when that change is there, rather than, as one of my friends on the webinar today was saying, people have hunkered down and gotten very tactical because the business has softened. So what's the likelihood in that culture that when a radical new opportunity floats by, people are willing to go after it and play with it and think about it and give it at least enough life to breathe its first few breaths before you kill it, because then maybe it might actually have some utility. And here we saw that culture. So how do I, as a leader, prepare my culture such that as change is coming along, great opportunities that float through during that time are going to be considered?
Right. And I think, Newell and Bob, what you just helped to demonstrate is a very practical example of one of the ways that you could keep innovation alive during change, and it's apply creative thinking to help you manage the transition either for yourself or for your team, because there's new ways of thinking that need to occur because your reality is changing. So there's, make it obvious. That is one real practical way to keep innovation a part of what you do during change. And Denise, I'm going to pause for just a second here. We invited people to keep bringing up questions as they arise. Are there any burning questions that have come in that we should pause and address at this moment?
No, I think we can move forward.
Okay, excellent.
Natalie, before we move forward, one thought. We were all giving examples of things that worked out. It doesn't always work out, right? Sometimes we really do just, besides replace, redefine, and, reinvent, sometimes we just have to relinquish. Sometimes we have to say, it's not going to work. And so to get real with ourselves, back to the lipstick on the pig story, to say, okay, it's time for a breakdown in what was, I really need to take a whole new path. So I just want to acknowledge sometimes, and that can be huge learnings for us.
Yeah, or it's not going to work for me. Maybe it's going to work for the organization, but not for me at this moment. And,
Exactly.
During this change as well, something that often you hear people talk about, and especially managers and leaders within the organizations, is you don't have all the answers. And so what do? Now what? Do you make it up, Bob? What do we do? How do we help lead people through when we don't even know ourselves exactly what's going on?
Well, we're all familiar with that idea of the elephant in the living room or the elephant in the boardroom. And so why not talk about this? The difficulty of transition, the difficulty that is change, and to name it as the transition, and to have conversations about it, and tell people things that can help them move further forward and create opportunities for dialogue that people can, it's a perfect time to ask people questions. It's a perfect time to help people observe themselves, to have an overt conversation about how it is I feel. What happens is that when we bring these things out into the daylight, they're much more likely to be resolved. But when they hang out in the dark, they continue to have power on us. So why not talk about it? And what you'll find is that more effective leaders typically create multiple opportunities, and can be frustrating because you might, especially if you're believing yourself safe over the long term in an organization, you might have made the transition much more rapidly than some other people are going to make that transition. So we need to be patient with that. A friend of mine in this college thing, he's helped the college a lot. He's an alumnus for a long time. He's really done a lot of things. And he's really feeling right now that he's probably not going to be able to support the college if they change his name. I don't think that's true. I think that after a bit of time, he's likely to transition to a place where he will continue to work to support and help the college. But we're going to go at different paces with these kinds of things. We need to put that out there and talk about it in a real way.
And so, Bob, it would seem that, to the productivity poll earlier, that productivity goes down to around 3.6 during intensive change. Is it even possible to really keep innovation going, or is it just going to, get swallowed up by the wave of change at the moment?
Well, yes and no, of course. So is it possible? Yes. Are there things that will make it more likely to happen quicker? Yes. Are there things that will get in the way? Yes. I oftentimes think of that movie that's a little YouTube video out where it's the crazy dancing guy, and somebody's put a narrative over the top of that about the power of the first follower. So one thing is to support other people who have made the transition more rapidly and get on board with them. The other is to ask for, if you're making that transition, make sure that other people are aware that you want them to be supportive of you and you want them to get on board, and they have the mechanism by which to have a conversation with you about that transition having been made. So much like the guy that created the new Facebook page or group last night, he now has a mechanism for people to follow him into that transition in a way that they can be productive. And out of that, the vice of change, he figured a way to pull innovation forward and is already seeing that. So that becomes the opportunity.
And Newell, would you say that's kind of the being overt about your intention to keep innovation a part of the equation as you go through the change?
Absolutely. And by just even naming that, it's like, how are we going to keep moving forward with whatever was the mutual dream in the first place? I mean, trying to figure out what the shared purpose is, that what's the pull into the future, like this guy's trying to pull innovation, that everybody shares in common, to keep that spark alive by saying, given all of this, how might we continue with that? Because that's part of the kind of the tenacity piece of it that really is critical to do in terms of it. I got a story here about one of the guys I work with, let's call him Mike, where talk about innovating under constraints. What his situation was, they're a video gaming company. They were up against clear deadlines to produce their product. And all of a sudden, headquarters comes down with a whole bunch of new orders to change it, which to him at the moment seems totally impossible. And he's had this happen to him lots of time before. Of course, no new resources besides to pull it off. Major crunch time going to be required to make it happen. But being the kind of corporate warrior that he was, by standing back, taking notice of the situation, he was really able to engage his whole team to really have conversations with all of them together about what can we do about this collectively to make the best of this situation. He didn't try and tackle it alone. He engaged his whole team together to make the best of it. And it wasn't perfect, but they really came up with a viable thing. Some of that produced a whole bunch of new innovative ideas because of that set of constraints. So sometimes it really can be used as a tool to get you to new places.
And I think that brings up a kind of a frank talk discussion, is so much about the culture and the groundwork and the structure that's in place. So Bob, talk a little bit about, we've been complaining a lot about, some of the realities. What are some things that you can do to help make the culture such that it can be more resilient to innovate during change? Bob, are you there?
I am here. I hit the mute button. So I hate that. So, and I just said something really good. But the work you and I have been doing, Natalie, in writing and sharing the wisdom of the team here in terms of what we've learned over the years. When we look at the 12 strategies or strategic action areas that we play around with in the Demystify book, which you all have access to right after this, the 4 areas, or really it's 5, that we pay the most attention to, that we think if you are making effort ahead of time to make sure that there's good activity in these areas, we believe that you'll weather transitions more effectively. So just to understand what we mean by these various things, here when we're talking about leadership, we're talking about leaders' actions demonstrate support for innovation fostering activities, so that even in the midst of change and before change, that I've got a steady leadership cadre that's constantly driving action around innovation. And under accountability and recognition, we're talking about leaders, managers, and workforce are held accountable for innovation fostering behaviors. That doesn't go away during change. You know, you've got a performance metric that says you shall not misspend the company's money, and you need to show up at work on time and things like that. Those, you know, innovation fostering systems of accountability need to be there. Focus, what we mean by that, it's a group or an individual that's responsible with executive involvement to constantly strengthen a culture of innovation. So if I know that that's my job, or my team knows that's our job, we're not going to stop doing that just because there's been a merger or an acquisition or a reduction in force or a softening of the market. And finally, if there's internal facilitation and skill development around creative process, then what will happen is you've got this internal group of people that have this. So a great case example, I'm thinking about Big Pharma, where they were trying to grow through, they did grow through M&A for quite a period of time, but it ended up gutting their pipeline in such a way that they had to lay off a bunch of people. I had to coach the guy that did a bunch of the layoff, but I was also working with this project management team that made the transition more rapidly. And because the manager of this particular group had been doing these activities ongoing to strengthen his group's effectiveness around innovation, they then became a center of excellence for driving a tremendous amount of energy through the company to say, okay, this is a new reality, but we want to make people's lives safer and healthier with the development of our therapeutics. So how can we get back on board as rapidly as possible? And I think that they were able to do that as well as they did because this leader of that group had really been paying attention to these kinds of things and building an innovation culture ahead of time. So they transition more rapidly.
And to help you all begin to look at where maybe you need to focus more effort, let's do a quick poll to assess where you're at today. So of these items, these 5 areas that Bob just mentioned, where do you need to put more effort to prepare for change? So not even talking about the change right now, but just to make a more change-ready innovation culture within your realm of responsibility. So Denise, go ahead and launch the poll.
Okay. Here we
So
go.
do you think
5 areas that we just talked about? So
you
in
need
those
to
5
develop
areas,
more.
yeah.
So
Yeah, keep looking to go.
Good as people are voting in, you know, just thinking for yourself, if you're thinking to the future, you want to prepare your organization so that it transitions more rapidly to a new reality. Which are these areas that you think you need to put some effort? And you'll have access. This book that Natalie and I wrote, we chose to make it free, so you'll be able to read about some of the things you can do in those areas more tactically, but strategically. Which are the areas? What are we getting, Denise?
You were about halfway there. I think they're almost evenly split, I would say, between the 5 groups, which I think is interesting. So between the 5 choices, they're running about even.
Oh, great. Yeah,
and see, this is, situational and also based on where effort is already being put forth. So sometimes people will say, what's the right answer? Where should I be putting effort? Well, it depends. Where are you putting effort now, and where do you need to strengthen your effort?
I'm curious if there's something. I'm curious if people saw something majorly missing from this. Whether they could put that in even into the questions area. Is there another area that somehow we didn't capture that's important?
That's a good point. But a question did come in about the choices we do have, and one person asked, could you clarify what is meant by facilitation capacity?
So during the transition, what will happen is that there are problems to be solved. And if those problems are named or opportunities to be sought after, if those opportunities are named, you're going to be more likely to kind of get your head wrapped around what to do if you've got an internal core of facilitators who can take you through the creative process more rapidly. So that's a big piece of it. And of course, and as another person is saying, if there is more frequent and transparent communication about what's going on, then the opportunities and the problems get named more rapidly, and you can begin to move these things through more quickly. I'm concerned about time, guys, so we've got to watch that.
Yeah, Denise,
okay.
Go ahead and publish the poll.
Yeah, so pretty close.
Yeah, pretty close. And go ahead.
And the point about communication, a person brought up a point earlier when we were talking about Paul Smith College, that the faculty probably came to the acceptance stage faster because they knew the why of the change, and they really understood the why.
Yeah, exactly. So, good.
Great. Go ahead and close the poll, Denise. And so that's a structure piece that you can look at where effort is being put forth. And Bob, why don't you quickly kind of tell us about, just as a leader yourself, some values you can lean on personally and what that looks like for people?
Well, the general theme here, and of course we've written extensively about this and won't have the time. We always over-anticipate what we can get done in these webinars. But the general theme here is that if I have been developing myself and my organization to have the kind of humility necessary that drives me to be curious, and then I'm courageous, and we stick with things, we have integrity, and we're aligning people with their passions. If we're doing that intentionally, if we're asking ourselves the creative question from an organizational development and a leadership point of view, how do we build this culture? How do we have these values? Then you get this kind of stuff. You get people saying, well, let's run an experiment to see what happens. That's interesting. Tell me more. Who has a different opinion? What might be all the ways? I don't know the answer to that yet. So it creates a dynamic where the attitude of people is such that they're more likely to transition rapidly and effectively back to a higher productivity and get back up to that 6.5 hours a day or whatever it is, in a productive way.
And Newell, so that starts to shift the way people feel. So I know this is one of your favorite quotes. So why don't you tell us about what this means to you?
Well, when I think about, and I'd like everybody for a moment to think about a leader that they really were willing to follow, that, if you're thinking your history, what was it about them? And I think Maya Angelou's quote captures it. I learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And that's never more true than in a time of transition. We think about a time when things were in the midst. This is where we really notice the difference.
Which is really important when you're looking at the future. And Bob, in summary, could you tell us a little bit about the strategies that we've talked about on this webinar in the 2 minutes we have remaining?
Right. So there's kind of three things that we'll look at here. That one is that, just to review, really, you can hear the thread of all this and what we've been saying. We need communication. We need to share as much information as possible. One participant talked about that early transparency. And so let's make sure that we're setting up systems to do that. We also need to be prepared for what we would call ad hoc solutions. We need to create a culture that's ready to have a conversation about opportunities that float by that might not have been there otherwise. At one point during the 2008 downturn, New and Improved was struggling financially, but an ad hoc solution, the creation of these fun little videos came along, and we went after it, and it created a nice little pot of gold for us, so to speak. And then finally, we need to both, during that time, it's a tremendous time to enhance creativity and learning, and think about discussing transition while it's happening and getting better at it, so that we not only are just doing this transition now and trying to get through it, but we're stepping back and watching our own process so that when the next transition comes along or next change comes along, we can transition more rapidly. So there's huge learning opportunities to develop organizational wisdom to do that in the future.
Bob, I just want to make sure, I'm going to make sure we address two questions that have come in. The first is the accumulation of changes, not an individual change, that present us a challenge. How do you go about prioritizing? Maybe prioritizing what you should work on first, prioritizing the challenges.
I'd want to involve other people in that. I'd want to use, it's a list the challenges, and then there's your diverge, and then converge is which one should we attend to right now, and think about that transparency. If you're doing that in a group, and even if you do it by yourself, but I'd prefer as a leader to pull my team together and say, look, this is all the stuff that could be dealt with right now. What makes the most sense for us to do that? It's a diverge converge with group participation. That's a kind of a pat answer, Kay, but that's the direction I'd want to go in.
And the other one, and this can obviously be serious, and this can really derail innovation, is how do you keep innovation focused when potential job losses could occur?
Right. And the reality is that this is going to come at us sometimes. There are going to be job losses that occur, reductions in force and various things. And so we've just got to get that done as rapidly as possible. When that is announced, the sooner you can move through it, the better off you can be. Now, if you're going to do that in such a way that you can be innovative about how you help people transition to new positions, all that, that's all good. But sometimes it's better to rip the Band-Aid off in situations like this, and the new reality then is what it is, and you can begin to move forward from there.
It is recognizing the loss. You really do need to acknowledge there is loss, and after you've done that, then you can start to stand back and say, okay, what are the new possibilities? You know, innovation only occurs when we have possibility thinking. So it's how do you move into that frame?
Right, and I think it's asking the question, what might be all the actions you can take once you understand what the impact your experience. Using something like a creative problem-solving model to help you think through those systems would be helpful. And again, we have more writing on our website for that. And I know we're a minute over time. So Newell, as your closing inspiration, I guess, for the participants today, what would you like to leave them with?
Well, I'd like them to leave with a sense of, change has opportunity in it. How do you stand back, stand outside yourself, and really observe yourself? How do you observe others? How do you notice what other people care about? And pay attention to that, because that's really where those new opportunities will be found.
Thank you. And Bob, what's the real deal here?
The real deal, frank talk from our Gator buddy. We wrote an article called The 3 Conspiracies to Kill Your Future. There's a lot of good thinking around that. The real deal is that this is hard. There's no way around the fact that it's hard, but we make it harder than it needs to be. There's a great quote I learned when I was an addictions counselor, and it said, the only pain we can avoid is the pain we create attempting to avoid our pain. So why not jump into it? Why not jump into it and understand what it is, and we'll transition more rapidly. Denial is going to just create more difficulty in the long run.
Well, thank you, and thanks everybody for joining us. Our apologies for going a few minutes over. We will be following up with an email that gives you a link to a landing page on our website that will have the recording of this webinar, have some different articles and videos on the topic that helps you dig into it a little more deeply. And we want to thank you very much for joining us today. Our intent was to energize your creative minds. We hope you feel that happened for you, and we wish you a wonderful rest of your day and hope to engage with you in the future. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.